Thank you for calling Navy Federal Credit Union. How can I help you?
Hi, if I'm in the Army, not in the Navy, am I still eligible for membership?
Yes, you are.
What about my sister in the Air Force?
Her too.
And my dad's a Marine.
We serve all branches of the military, veterans, and their families.
My dog is a retired military working dog.
I'll see what I can do.
Find out if you're eligible at NavyFederal.org. Navy Federal Credit Union. Our members are the mission. Insured by NCUA.
I'm Emily Elizabeth, and I'm the host of the What Fulfills You podcast, a show for and about individuals always seeking to be their best selves. On this show, we talk all about building the mindset, finding the right careers, creating meaningful relationships, and so much more. Welcome to the What Fulfills You podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the What Fulfills You podcast. My name is Emily Elizabeth, and I am your host. This week's guest I have on Rich Heller, who is known as a relationship fitness coach and mediator. So, of course, you can probably imagine that this episode is heavily focused around relationships, what we can do when it comes to the longevity of a relationship or marriage, overcoming conflict, and of course, I dive into the questions around what it really takes to have a successful marriage and or relationship for such a long period of time. Rich has been married to his current partner for nearly as long as I've been alive, you guys. And actually, for some of you listening, he may have been with his partner for as long as you've been alive or even longer. And I think that's something to be said, because if you have been in a relationship of any sort, especially if it's been a few years, you might have experienced some of the classic ups and downs, the difficulties, or when a relationship gets a little stagnant. You might have seen that a little bit so far. I've been in a 4-year relationship myself in a previous one where I certainly went through different relationship obstacles and difficulties that enabled me to have a better understanding of whether it was going to be, if that person was an ideal partner for me, and number two, what I can do better in a future relationship. And what's unique with Rich's perspective, he's actually previously divorced and remarried for 20 some years now. And so I think that's fascinating, where we do get to touch on his realization of that stage in his life where he went through a divorce, and also the co-parenting process and whatnot, and how he transitioned to his current marriage. So for some of you guys, you might not be accustomed to listening to people who are, married and have been married for nearly your age. And I think that's the thing too, is I notice a lot of in today's cultures that we get a lot of the relationship or dating advice from people that are maybe only 5 years older than us or 10, 15 years older than us. But the irony is that maybe they haven't even been married yet, or maybe they haven't had a specific long-term relationship to be able to reflect on. And so that's why I like to take a little bit from everyone, right? So people that understand the current dating dynamics. So again, I've spoken about this before. I love to chat with an older girlfriend of mine. She's 10 years older than me and has had different experiences where she kind of shares from an older sister perspective. But then also in this conversation, I really get to hear from someone's perspective what it takes to last in a marriage for over 20 years and successfully and happily do it. So that's what I really appreciate from this conversation, is that Rich was really awesome in just being openly honest and vulnerable about his past and current experience, and even just being pretty blunt about the fact that, there are some moments where you don't feel like showing up for your partner, or you don't feel like, showing love to your partner, but there are certain habits that you have to learn how to implement to actually keep a relationship growing and flourishing. And, again, over 20 years, I think that's really amazing and something to be said. So with that being said, I know you are going to enjoy and learn a lot from this conversation. So let's welcome Rich Heller to the podcast. Well, Rich, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I am very excited to touch on some deeper topics around relationships, something that I know you are very experienced in. But I would love to start with your personal journey. I know that you mentioned you were previously divorced and now successfully remarried for over 20 years. Can you share just some of that journey with us and kind of take us through that timeline?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you for having me here and allowing me to be a voice in your podcast. I really appreciate it. And it's been the relationship thing is a heck of a journey. The story I tell my clients is I grew up in Armageddon, and they go, oh, but basically what that means is I didn't have ideal models for what a loving, trusting, caring, intimate relationship could be. There was a lot of really high conflict, almost on every level you can imagine. And their divorce was, we didn't see much of the actual divorce, but we saw, my brother and I saw the fallout. My mom, I remember 10 years after my dad was dead, my mom was talking stuff about him. And I was like, Mom, he's dead. Like, how is this helping anyone, much less you? And she was like, oh, you're right. So, I mean, there's a lot of feeling there, and not positive feeling. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have negative feelings, but when they linger,
right.
The purpose of anger is to move into action, not to dwell in it and roll in it endlessly. And so being a child from that environment, as you can imagine, I was not a relationship expert starting out in life. And to give your listeners the short story, and I'm sorry, the short story is so long. The short story is I started out taking hostages, which means I picked women who I thought had a broken wing, and I was going to help them fly. But really what I was doing was I was grabbing them by their broken wing and sort of keeping them close, because I was afraid if they found out who I really was, they would leave. And inevitably, they'd find out who I really was, and they would leave. And usually they would walk out on my back, rubbing crap on my head. And not that it was not deserved, but that's what those relationships, that's the flavor of that kind of relationship. And when it's a not partnership. And eventually I got enough help so that I learned what a partnership could be and have one today. But even that's not, there's no princess kissing the frog turns into a prince happy ending for any of us. It's ongoing work. Even the prince still has warts. Or sometimes the prince degrades into a frog for a while, or sometimes the princess turns into an ogre. Like in real life, even healthy, strong partnerships have definitely got their challenges.
Yeah.
And that was the short version, Emily.
That's something I love hearing reiterated, especially for the younger generation, because I notice a pattern, especially around conversations within, social circles and even on social media, where sometimes I think people assume that it's supposed to be a smooth ride, especially in the early days. Like they act like conflict is not supposed to happen, that different obstacles are not supposed to happen. Of course, I think there's a spectrum of, okay, if there's a extreme difficulty in the beginning, that may be, a little bit of a question mark. But at the same time, I think it's almost like, because of today's dating culture with dating apps and the ability to kind of, jump from one to the next, it's almost like people don't realize you have to put in work in order for a relationship to thrive. And I like that you said that.
I think that our culture feeds that.
Right.
If you look at most of what's out there on screens, big and small, everybody wants to see the happy ending forever and ever, anon and on. And and if you look at our politics, we're really not very good at, right now. We're going through a period of not so good at resolving conflict. It's either you're wrong and I'm right, or let's not talk about it.
Right.
And so I think that the wider culture is modeling, it's either a reflection of us or it's modeling behavior for us that isn't healthy, or it's probably both, honestly, because it's a reflection of us and we're learning from it. So I don't think it's, I think it's a widespread issue. And the reason why I do the work that I do is, I've seen it, the high conflict. I've been in relationships where there was no conflict and watched it explode. And I've been in my current marriage for 23 years where, we really had to find our way and learn and we're still learning how to resolve difference more and more effectively and creatively.
Before we dive into the success of your 23-year marriage, do you mind sharing a little bit of some realizations you had from your first marriage and maybe primarily around divorce and what?
No, we only talk about the good stuff, remember? It's all or nothing. For sure, I would be happy to, because I view the great strength of humanity is that we can turn the bad into good. That's kind of my personal experience and mission. And so I will gladly share any of the dirt that I have, that not at the expense of anyone I've been with,
right?
If it'll help other people. So in my first marriage, it was a broken wing marriage. I picked someone who I thought I could really help, and I couldn't. And I also walked into it with the belief that I was never going to get divorced. I was never going to do to my children what my parents did to me. I had kind of a victim thing going on.
Got it.
So 5 years into that marriage, I realized that the mother of my children had a diagnosable mental illness that she wasn't getting help with. And I probably should have walked then, but because I was never going to do to my children what my parents did to me, and because I was, going to hold the sanctity of marriage up on a pedestal and work through it, and surely I could help her. I got a master's degree in social work while I was with her. I think unconsciously the thought was maybe I can get the tools to help her fix this wing. And my children suffered intensely. And in the 10th year, I finally realized that the problem wasn't that she was broken. The problem was that I was. And I got out because I wasn't being my best self, or even close to my best self in that marriage. And it was really badly influencing my children. And it wasn't, I wasn't helping her any either. So in the end, I left not because she was awful or mentally ill or terrible or wasn't going to get help. It was like, oh my God, I don't like who I am in this relationship. And I'm never going to like who I am in this relationship as long as it goes on this way. And, to this day, she still wrestles with that diagnosis, and it's not my problem. Only in that she's my parenting partner, and my job is to do my best to uplift her and strengthen her as my co-parent.
You mentioned there kind of more of a reflection of yourself and how you felt while you were in that relationship. In that realization, what would you say people can do better to recognize whether someone is a right partner for them?
It's a really complicated question. And what's complicated about it is that we are all going through life, with the lenses of our childhoods and our culture on. And so just as I thought I had picked the perfect partner. When I met this woman, I thought she was the perfect partner for me. She was Latina, and my family's from Buenos Aires in Argentina. Go Argentina! Going to watch the World Cup today. I thought, oh, finally, I'm embracing, my Latin culture. There was so much that seemed right about it, through those lenses, and there was so much that wasn't right about me. So the question really is, what glasses are we wearing when we see our perfect partner? So I think if the journey is to find, I don't know about perfect partner either. That word is really dangerous.
And that's why I avoid.
I think I put that in, not you.
Yeah, I usually say like the right or aligned partner, because I do believe that there are potential few out there, at least from my knowledge. I don't ever believe there's one and only one, but I think like you mentioned, you're like, you thought you could kind of help her and kind of fix her in a way. So I think it's kind of like, how can we catch ourselves in those times that we're not actually, you know what I mean? Like that.
By the way, I didn't think that consciously. This is like 2020 hindsight. 5 years into the marriage, I realized, I'm with someone with a broken wing and I'm trying to fix it. I'm getting my master's in social degree. I'm social work.
Got it.
Starting to understand that I'm getting some help from professionals. It's like, I'm the problem, So, nobody walks into a hostage situation thinking I'm going to take a hostage. It's a very unconscious process. So my point is that we find the people that are right for us given the place that we're coming from. Now, whether it's healthy or not has to do with where we're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And the basis for that belief is there are 4 requisites for change, right? The first, if you want to move from one space to another, is you need to be willing to release anything that's in the way of your movement. That we call that, in my world, negative emotion or baggage, right? To move, or just to, I'm going to Florida with my wife in a couple of weeks. We're going to leave a lot behind to go to Florida. We're not going to take our house and our furniture. We're only going there for a couple of months, but we're going to leave a lot of baggage behind. Number 2, you need to have a strategy or an idea of where it is you want to go. Number 3, you need to be willing to take action based on those 2 things. And number 4, you need to be willing to adjust along the way. So, God, I can't believe I'm saying this. We tend to attract people from the place that we're coming from. So if we're coming from a place of brokenness, which I most certainly was when I met my first wife, we attract people who are similarly broken. Right. If we're willing to let go of some of that baggage, the stuff that we learned in our culture, the stuff we learned from our parents, from our grandparents, our great-grandparents, the neighborhood that we're in, the experiences that we have in school, if we're willing to release some of that and get clear about what it is we really want, then we'll attract someone that's better. A better fit. That's how I want to put it.
Right. So in that case, it always comes back to you, right? Yeah. Where you are. And I love that, because I've always been a advocate for, you have to, again, we're always a work in progress, but I've always believed, instead of jumping from one relationship to the next, observe how you are as an individual, right? Are you at a place where you want to be? Not to say that means you have to be completely closed off to dating anyone, but I think that you have to be very mindful of where you are internally, and if there are some things that need to be worked on along the way.
Well, wherever I go, whoever I'm with, I'm still there. And the statistics on divorce back it up. 50% roughly of all marriages end in divorce. But guess what the statistics are on second marriages? It's 70%.
Right.
Proving that out of the 50% who get divorced and remarried, more than half of those blow it again.
Right.
I guess 7 out of 10 people who get divorced again, meaning that they didn't learn whatever they needed to learn about themselves in order to have that relationship work.
And I love that you mentioned that, because that's why I found it important to kind of touch on your experience from your first marriage leading into now you've been successfully married for over 20 years. What was that change like? How did you go from that to a more successful relationship?
Yeah, boy, that's a big one. I'm going to try and answer in sound bites here. The first part was the reason I got out of that first marriage was the realization that there was something not right over here. Okay. I had stopped. Well, let's be honest. I had reduced my blame and my criticism of the other parent. And part of the journey of divorce was learning to really stop doing that altogether for the sake of my children and really start to focus on me. I'd done some therapy. I had done some group work. I had an active meditation and prayer life. I had learned to take better care of myself. All of those things helped me to become, it sounds very narcissistic. I took about care of me. But the truth is, if we're not charging our own battery 100%, we can't really operate 100% in our lives. So to some extent, our priority when it comes to self-care, mind, body, spirit, needs to be me, so that then I can show up for you. So I show up less needy in the relationships. So I did a lot of that work. And when I met my second wife, and I believe final wife, the jury's out, there's still time. I continued doing those things, and we both had a very strong ethos that we were to develop as individuals, as partners at the same time. We weren't always successful at those things. Sometimes we failed in one area and not the other. There was a period there where we woke up and we were kind of like living that parallel lives thing or roommate things, like, wait a minute, I'm not sure you're the person I married. You wake up, you go, who are you? And then there's a decision you make when that happens. Like, am I going to work on this, or am I going to, spin out? But the decision always has been, all right, the relationship needs work. Let's work on the relationship. Or I'm struggling as an individual. Or you're struggling as an individual. I'm going to help you, or I'm struggling as an individual. You help me. There's always an awareness of that balance.
Interesting. And I really like that you mentioned that key factor of working on yourself individually. So having that growth continue, but also the relationship as well, like having it separate, right? In a way.
Yeah. Well, because we're both remarried. So we were really careful about how we commingled our funds. We didn't just say, you know what, you are my true love. You're my true soulmate. Sorry, the first soulmate was a mistake. Instead, it was, we're going to have our individual incomes and our joint account.
Okay.
We're going to pay for our family everything shared out of the joint account. If I earn more than you, that means I get more play money than you as a percentage, or if you earn more than me. And over 20 years, that's changed. There was a time when I earned more than she did. There's a time when she's earned more than I have. It's interesting.
Right.
What that feels like.
Right.
That's a whole nother show. What it means to be a man when your wife is earning the pants off of you. This is a whole nother episode. But, because we maintained financial and emotional boundaries.
Right.
Didn't cross them too often. I think we made it through a lot of rough spots that we didn't make it through in our first marriages.
That makes me really curious then. What would you say are the top 2 reasons you attribute to having a successful marriage this time? And for this length of time, right? It's 23 years, which is, a very long time. And I've always said this to my friends, especially in recent conversations. I think there's something to be said about people who are able to stay connected and attuned to one another for that long, right? Almost as long as I've been alive, which I think is just, which is, again, I'm very adamant about learning from people's realizations over that period of time, because oftentimes I've noticed there are maybe common denominators among people who have been in that length of a relationship, what they kind of say they attribute to success of that.
I would say the 2 things that I attribute our success to are, number one, we've pretty much always had a shared vision for our lives.
Mm-hmm.
But even before that, I want to say, it was love. Love conquers all. But the truth is that it's a partnership, and partnerships are built on both people have their individual strengths and skills, and they have their shared vision. And that's a beautiful thing about partnerships is there's synergy in that kind of relationship. Yes. So even though I want to say love was on top, that shared vision has been and is really vitally and important. And as our children grew up, we had to the original shared vision is, wow, we got to help each other and these kids through these other parents that we don't like so much.
Right.
We got to be the strengths that we feel the other parents aren't bringing here.
Right.
To these children without being more than a step parent. And we've got a bunch of shows on step parenting over at Rich in Relationship if you want to learn more about that coming up. And then when they grew up, there was, okay, now what's our role? Our role is changed, expanding and growing. Still the same vision, but expanded. And then the second part is about love, but it's not what you think, right? Like when you meet, you fall in love, it's all gushy and wonderful. And you feel like more than who you ever thought of yourself in the presence of the other person, because they see all your potential and you freaking bask in it, and vice versa. Right. But that's a 2 or 3 year deal, says the studies, right? Everyone falls out of love, period, the end. So love now becomes a muscle. That means instead of sometimes, you're not feeling it, but that you love that person, that you're going through a tough time in your marriage, but you've got this shared vision. You're in my spiritual group circles, we call it, you're in the valley, but you've got the shared vision of the mountaintop, and you're in the valley, and maybe it's like kind of a bog, and there's like insects and strange animals, and it's not feeling too good. That's when you exercise your love muscle. Hey, baby, you know what? I know we're in a tough place together, but I love you, and we have this mountaintop we're going to. And even though I'm feeling a little triggered, and I want to emotionally, kick your ass or whatever's going on,
right.
Could you please pass the potatoes?
Uncle Bob, why are you singing?
With all the rewards we are getting, with the Navy Federal Credit Union's cash rewards card, I hired a singing coach for caroling.
But it's summer.
Since we get up to 1.75% cash back on all our holiday purchases, there is cheer to last all year.
Please stop.
These potatoes are delicious, by the way.
Get cheer to last all year with Navy Federal Credit Union. Our members are the mission. Insured by NCUA.
Happen on either side. I'm going to put that on the side here. I'm going to focus on building you up and building our relationship up. That's exercising your love muscle. So exercising your love muscle is, even though I've got some negative self-talk going on, even though I've got some feelings I'm not too proud of and that I wouldn't want to air out on a podcast, I'm going to be there for you anyway. And it goes back to, if your battery isn't 100%, when you're triggered, my battery, forget you. When my battery's at 100% and I'm triggered, stuff comes out of my mouth that I can never take back. When my battery's 100% and I'm triggered, I can go, maybe I'm going to go for a walk, or maybe I'm going to go to the bathroom, or maybe I'm going to do some deep breathing in the bathroom, a little meditation, maybe a prayer, until I can be strong in your presence again. That's what being 100% is about, is when you're in the valley and stuff is about to come out that you can never take back. That's when you want to be 100% right there. So those are the two things that have really worked in our marriage. Is, we have a shared mountain that we're going to, and we take good care of ourselves as individually, and we make sure that each one is taking good care of themselves too. Like, I super support her. She's got to practice. She rides. It is not convenient for me. It's expensive. She's self-supporting in it. I want to be clear, but it's expensive, a little scary for me financially. It demands a hell of a lot of time. She wants me to show up for her in it, which isn't a lot of fun for me sometimes, but it's really important to her. It keeps her fit. It's the way she charges her batteries. And so as her partner, I show up, and sometimes I don't want to be there, and I suck it up and I show up because I know that's my love muscle. I know it's what's best for her.
So love muscle, would you say in layman's terms, that's kind of just saying like you show up and you choose to love that person? You
choose to act as if you love them.
Even if you're not feeling it. Okay.
You're feeling like, oh man, I'm at another horse show.
Right.
I'm cleaning horse poop out of the stalls, which isn't my dream in life, because nobody else is there and she needs someone to do it for her while she does whatever. There's nothing like scooping horse poop, let me tell you. But I love her, and I know this is going to help her dream. And so I'm going to be here for her in this way. And I'm going to set aside the fact that I don't love scooping poop and the fact that I'd rather be doing my own podcast or whatever. Right. And I'm going to exercise that love muscle. I'm going to act as if, even though I don't love this moment, and when I'm done, it's like washing the dishes. Right. We don't like washing the dishes. We love the way the kitchen looks afterwards. After I do show up for her, I love the way it looks afterwards. She feels cared for. And she knows I don't love it. Knows that I'm exercising my love muscle and appreciates it.
Wow. Okay. Ooh, those are definitely.
And she does that for me as well. I went off for a 3-week training in neurolinguistic programming in Arizona. And she was like, I don't want you to go. I don't want to do the things that you do for the house while you're gone. I don't want you. I'm going to miss you. It's going to be awful for us. She said, but I know you need to do this. I know you need this information, that it's going to help you grow individually and professionally. And so I bless it. And while I was gone, she said, I'm really mad at you. She would say on the calls, I would say, I know, I don't blame you, but she exercised her love muscle and blessed that.
Wow.
Me. When I came back, she gave me a big hug and she said, I was really pissed at you. And I said, yeah, I don't blame you.
Yeah. Wow. But
I thanked her. It's two-sided.
Right.
And I'll throw something else in there if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So here's the bad news about that scenario is none of us likes change. We want it goes back to, I want the happy ending forever and ever.
Right.
Amen. But if you're both growing as individuals and changing, that means the relationship is constantly changing also. And that's scary. A major change. I spiritually identified as a Christian beginning about well, it goes way back, but I came out like about 5 or 6 years ago, not religious, not so much religiously, but that's very scary for my wife, who's agnostic, and it took a long time for her to figure out that that didn't mean I was going to go bomb abortion clinics and that I was going to become that really my ethics were still the same, that my spiritual focus was a little different. And that was a big change. And yet, here we are 5 years later and it's good.
Would you say what has kept some of the changes not feeling drastic is still having that shared vision?
Yes, very much so. And part of the transition for her was her getting that though the frame had changed slightly in terms of who I wanted to model my life after. It's really about who are your heroes. When I see identify as, I had chosen someone who was living in a way that I thought was the difference maker in the world. I'm not talking about turning water into wine, though. That's not a bad trick. I'm talking about treating people with compassion. And, this is a guy, when you look at his life, who hung out with prostitutes and he had no stuff about class. He didn't really like the people who were mad successful and hypocrites. Like, I'm talking about that stuff. Once she figured out it was about that, it's like, yeah, you know what? I want to help people who are less privileged or have less advantage. I want to show up as a caring human being. Yeah. She saw, we're still going to the same mountaintop, because that resonated. She was afraid that it meant that I was going to be voting differently, or that I was going to be telling women how to use their bodies, and she realized that it wasn't a political position. It was a lifestyle choice.
Yeah. And I like that you mentioned that too, because I think that is so important. A slight tangent, but it is so important to indicate that it comes back to the values that you align, maybe in that case, like you aligned in terms of values and ethics with that new, adaptation into your life, right? It wasn't necessarily such a black and white thing where people automatically assume, it means you're XYZ now because you suddenly decided to bring that into your life.
And on the other side, she got to look at a lot of preconceptions she had about people who identify the way that I do, and realize that on the spectrum of people who identify that way, there are people who we see in the news all the time, who show up as kind of destructive and wanting to impose their will on others. And then there's people on the other end, who aren't about politics, who are more about a way of life. And then there's everything in the middle. So it actually helped her to let go of some of that judgment. And judgment can be really limiting in life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the thing, is we change, throwing out our experience personally. As individuals, we're changing and growing. And every time that happens, we get to look at, all right, what's my judgment? What am I up against here? What does that change? Why is that change scary? What could be good about it? What can I learn from it? That's and I'm going to, it's having that kind of relationship that's dynamic. It's risky. It's scary. It's also exciting and fulfilling. There's so much opportunity when both people are growing and changing, and the relationship is growing and changing. And there's always the possibility that one day you'll wake up and find out that you're divergent.
Right.
And then the question is, are we forever divergent, or is it more like a dance where we come apart and come together? And I would argue that relationship is probably more like that. We like to think of it as this: we're permanently intertwined. Two hearts is one. It's what I have on my wedding ring. Two hearts is one mind. But in reality, I think we grow apart and come together. And some people grow apart and they just say, screw this, and they keep growing apart,
Right. Besides some of those inevitable changes, what would you say are, or tends to be, the common difficulties for couples that arise over long-term relationships, let's say like after 5 years? This could be from your experience as well, from clients as well. What are some common difficulties?
There are two negative challenges for all partnerships. The whole core is, how do we handle and resolve difference?
Right.
Which is kind of what I shared with you about our journey. Oh my God, my husband's different. Oh, but he's not so different. Right. So there's the two tendencies in our society. Just look at politics. Is when we fight tooth and nail. I'm right, you're wrong. I'm the winner, you're the loser. No matter what you say, I'm going to kill you, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's super toxic, negative conflict.
Mm-hmm.
It's blame-driven, anger-driven conflict. And like we see it all over the place right now. People marching, protesting with freaking M16s on their, on their hips. So that is insane. Who do these people think they're shooting? I know they're standing up for their right to bear arms, but like, it just, it's terrifying. All right. And by the way, I'm all for the right to bear arms, but this thing where you march in the streets with an M16, that's just a little too, something's not right. Then there's the other kind of thing where, you know what, conflict is bad, so we're not going to have it. All right. And you can do that for a long time, where you just dance around. You know what? We don't agree. We don't agree about religion. So I'm going to have mine, you're going to have yours, and we're just not going to talk about it. I actually know a lot of couples who have different faiths, or one is an atheist and the other one's religious in some way,
right?
And they just, we're just not going to talk about it. I'm going to go to my synagogue, mosque, whatever, ashram, whatever you got going on. The other one's just like, I can't believe they do that crap, but that's their crap. Right. But the problem with that is there's no opportunity to explore where the shared territory is. And the differences become greater and greater. And eventually those conflict avoidant relationships explode. Somebody has sex with somebody else, which in that context, it isn't always bad, by the way. Some couples have an agreement that that's okay. But
right.
Do something that's a breach of the agreement. They have sex with somebody else. I'm just going to identify the typicals. If this is good in your marriage, you're good with sex in your marriage, that's okay. I'm just saying this is typically what does it. They're not monogamous. They spend money in a way without talking to their partner that threatens the stability of the family. They start traveling in circles or groups of people that the other person just absolutely finds abhorrent, something that appears like a breach of trust. And then the whole thing explodes even bigger. So it's the whole challenge is difference. How do we resolve difference? And those are the two styles.
I read somewhere, actually, it's interesting, in a book last year, I can't quote it, but it was something along the lines of how success in relationships really comes down to the tasteful way we navigate the differences. It was something around that. And I find it ironic that you mentioned that here as well, in that it really comes down to how you're navigating and resolving conflict, right?
Or not.
Right.
I think the reason why the Democrats and Republicans are so polarized is they seem to have lost the ability to navigate conflict. That's a mirror of what we're doing in our homes. And so the real talent is navigating difference or conflict creatively and constructively. And that is, here's the amazing thing. Nothing new ever was created without difference. Ever. Right? Because if everything's the same, nothing new can be created.
Right.
Because everything's the same. Everything new comes out of difference.
So for someone who experiences conflict, whether it's in a romantic relationship or maybe just even in friendships and outside relationships, what would you say is the number one piece of advice you would have, or technique or communication skill improvement? What would you pinpoint it on?
Well, it's funny, the three basic legs of intimacy that we work with couples here really apply to everything for intimacy, right? Intimacy is where you feel safe, and it's where you feel like you're being nurtured or cared for, or that you're with family, or whatever warm words help frame that. And let's be really clear, words are just labels. So all of those words mean something. So some people, family doesn't mean warm and fuzzy. So what I'm saying is intimacy, think of intimacy as warm, fuzzy, caring, one-to-one relationship that's based on three things. And I think that applies to everything. So the first is caring communication. We can have all kinds of communication, but when we come from a place of really caring about the other person, right, that kind of communication is going to be really different than an intellectual conversation or an angry conversation or a challenging, or sometimes caring can show up as challenging, but in this context, caring communication would be, if you're going to be challenging, it's in the gentlest, most sugar-coated, easy to receive way possible. There's some people who would maintain that tough love is a form of caring, and it might be, but I'm not talking about tough love here.
Right.
I'm talking about stuff that is really easy to swallow. Caring communication. The second would be trust. And to some extent, that trust is built in the way we communicate. Right? I know that I can trust Emily Elizabeth because we've had conversations before, and she's always been caring with me. She's always been respectful of my point of view. She's always been, you've been very consistent in our conversations. And so we've established a level of trust.
Right.
And then the third thing is, and this is the big one, is empathy. And empathy is that emotional connection between two people. And here's the funny thing about empathy. We live in a culture that emphasizes how important it is to always be winning and always be on top and always feel good. And we really diminish being a victim. We don't do that in the US of A. This culture in our country is built very much on, we are the big dog, and big dogs are not victims. And that we have sayings like, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Fall off a horse, get back on it, and stuff like that. But empathy is actually built on knowing sadness, on knowing hurt, on knowing fear, on knowing these negative emotions that we kind of try to stuff and repress and put away because our wider culture tells us these are not helpful. But the truth is, the only way that we can really build connection with people is when we know our hurt, when we know our fear, when we know our sadness. That's when, and I see it in you. I go, oh my God, Emily's just like me. Like, no matter that, even though she's a woman, even though she's in her 20s, even though she's got a different cultural background or is on the West Coast and I'm on the East Coast or whatever it is, even though she wears pink lipstick and I like black lipstick, whatever it is, we have shared pain. That's what empathy is about. And so it's that shared pain. It's the seeing the pain in other people. I told you the success in my marriage has been when the other person's falling off the horse, part of it is being there for them. I guess I'm stuck on the horse metaphor because of my wife's thing. Part of it is, oh, you know what, honey? Wow, that stinks that you didn't get that client. That stinks that person quit. That stinks that your mom said that. Wow, that's so painful. I hurt with you. With you. That's, without that, the other two things are useless. And culturally, I firmly believe that if we practiced empathy, trust, and caring communication, we change the balance of the whole, maybe the whole world.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that those three, especially caring, communication, and empathy, I would say in a way, like, increased or improved in that because of my practice of mindfulness, as I mentioned from our last conversation, over the past probably 6 months. And I noticed drastically how I am naturally more patient with people, and in a very good way. There obviously some people might feel like, oh, I don't want to get walked over, that kind of thing. But it's a very different way of seeing things, because I think as a former athlete and a competitive athlete, I think I used to have that mentality of, a little bit of like that big dog. And it would take a lot out of me to jump into empathy when it came to relationships. And so for me, I can say personally that has been a game changer for caring, communication, and empathy and compassion, especially for your partner and for friends. It's in a way, I read in mindfulness that it's kind of like seeing that everyone still has that inner child in them, and recognizing that sometimes in that moment they didn't know any better, and kind of giving them compassion and empathy for that. So I think it's very interesting that you mentioned that as well.
Yeah, well, it's the deal breaker in my marriage is empathy.
Wow.
If I'm not feeling empathetic, that's when I accidentally even, walk on my wife's feelings and she's triggered. But if I'm feeling empathy and I step on her toes, I see it, I feel it. Because like when I'm in empathy, I'm connected to her.
Okay, last two questions. First one, book recommendation. Anything that you have that you feel like would bring some wisdom to the listeners?
The most formative book for me personally, when I was in that marriage that I was not helping any, was Codependent No More by Melody Beattie, which is like a classic. And she described this way of behaving, of trying to control other people by helping them. And I was like, oh my God, this is me. And that book is unbelievably transformative. I mean, just, if you're wondering what kind of relationship you have, it's totally worth reading. A book that's been really key, and I debate sometimes whether I should recommend it, is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Right. And most people think, oh, that's like an entrepreneur's book. But what Napoleon Hill identifies, he draws these principles from other sources that I will spare you because we don't have a lot of time. I did a lot of research into Napoleon Hill at one point in my life, and I read that book maybe 6 times. Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. He basically identifies how to create a goal and move towards it, and what's the environment we need to create to make change within ourselves, which I think applies to business, but I think it applies to everything. Yeah. And then there's one more. The Power of TED outlines the victim, abuser, rescuer triangle. There's a triangle there. And when we're feeling like a victim, or we're feeling like an abuser, or we think we're helping people, that's the codependency thing. We're in that position. That dynamic is maintained. Even when we think we're rescuing people, we're maintaining an unhealthy dynamic. And in The Power of TED, the author, whose name eludes me at this point, shows an alternative, for that, how you can step out of that dynamic.
Last question, and it's something I ask everyone on the show, but what would you say fulfills you in life?
What fulfills me is that today I live a purpose and mission driven life. I am crystal clear that my purpose is to help parents in all situations to have joyful and resilient relationships so that their children are always front and center and have a joyful and resilient future. I'm crystal clear about this. And so all my work is focused on this. All my work is focused. I almost exclusively work with parents. Every now and then I get an outlier for some reason. And it usually has to do with it taps that sense of purpose and mission. And that's incredibly fulfilling to me, because it's healing the wounds of my childhood. It's making good of the bad, and it's making a difference in the wider ecology in the world. So in a way that has meaning for me and for the world.
Absolutely. Oh, I love that. It's about making impact, isn't it?
Yeah, but when I think about Mother Teresa, I used to think about this woman who gave up everything to go help people. But the truth is, Mother Teresa really loved what she did. So we can't really be making a difference. I was once the champion of sustainability. Like, I had a whole business that successfully altered the way people interacted with their rooftops and their landscapes, and it was sustainably based, and it was mad successful. Built more square footage of green roofs than anyone in New York, I think, still to date. I think we still hold that, like, acres of green roofs. But it wasn't personally fulfilling. It was a great mission,
right?
But it wasn't personally fulfilling. It was kind of like, I thought, well, Mother Teresa did this for people, and I can do this for people. But the reason why this thing is more personally fulfilling is it resonates with me personally in a way that sustainability didn't. I still stand for that. I still believe in that. Yeah. It's just not as fulfilling.
Could not agree more. We can feel that in our gut, I would say. Thank you so much, Rich, for joining me on the show. Where can everyone learn more about your podcast, and where else they can find you?
They can find everything on our website, which is richinrelationship.com. You can email me if you want. If you have questions, feel free to reach out, which is rich at that website, richinrelationship.com. And you can find our podcast there and our video blog. All the resources are there.
Amazing. Well, I will definitely link that in the show notes, and they'll be able to find you and definitely check it all out. And that was all for today's episode. I really hope you found some value in this conversation and hopefully took some notes so you could remind yourself. If you did enjoy this episode, please be sure to rate and review the podcast either on Apple or Spotify. It really means the world to me to just take 30 seconds to give it a quick rating and review. And as always, if you have feedback or suggestions, please feel free to message me on Instagram at whatfulfillsyou or my personal one at Emily E. Duong. You guys know I love chatting with you all. This community is amazing, and I truly am so grateful for the continuous support. Thanks again for tuning in today. I would chat with you all in the next episode.
This holiday season, Peloton's got a gift for you. Right now, get up to $200 off accessories with the purchase of a Peloton Shred. Accessories like non-slip grip resistance bands, a heart rate monitor, yoga blocks, and more. Take your workout to the next level with Peloton. Motivation that moves you. Hurry, this limited time offer ends December 25th. Visit onepeloton.com to learn more. All access membership separate. Offer ends December 25th. Cannot be combined with other offers. See additional terms at onepeloton.com.